Have your preoccupations as a poet changed since those early days of Hawk in the Rain and Lipperkull?
Not really. I suppose every writer's experience is that he, not so much that he changes, as that he finds more out about himself or herself. But in a way, when I write most freely now, when I touch what I feel is my own thing now, I'm writing very much as I did at the beginning, the actual music of it. Also, I think most writers of verse, they have several different personalities. The ideal, I suppose, is to find a style or a method that includes them all. But he is one of them, and I don't think this is in actual music, as I say, or intention, or the life in it, is any different than what I was looking for in the beginning. And the title is Dust as We Are, which is part of a Wordsworth sentence. Dust as we are, the immortal spirit grows like harmony in music. And it's just about my early days with a father who was obviously very fresh from the First World War. A very silent man. My post-war father was so silent. He seemed to be listening. I eavesdropped on the hot line. His lonely sittings mangled me in secret. Like TV watched too long, my nerves lasered. Then an after image of the incessant mowing passage of machine gun effects, what it filled a trench with. And his laugh, how had that survived, so nearly intact? Twitched the curtain, never quite deftly enough, over the hospital wards crowded with his photographed, shock-eyed pals. I had to use up a lot of spirit getting over it. I was helping him. I was his supplementary convalescent. He took up his pre-war joie de vivre, but his displays of muscular definition were a bleached montage, lit landscapes, swamp quakes of the slime of puddled soldiers, where bones and bits of equipment showered from every shell burst. Naked men slithered staring, where their mothers and sisters would never have to meet their eyes or see exactly how they sprawled and were trodden. So he had been salvaged and washed, his muscles very white, marble white. He had been heavily killed, but we had revived him. Now he taught us a silence like prayer. There he sat, killed but alive, so long as we were very careful. I divined with a comb, under his wavy golden hair as I combed it, the frailty of skull. And I filled with his knowledge. After a mother's milk, this was the soul's food, a soap-smell spectre of the massacre of innocence. So the soul grew, a strange thing with rickets, a hyena, no singing, that kind of laughter.
That seems much richer to me than earlier poetry.
More of me in it, less of that world that I was looking for that wasn't me, I suppose.
One of the things you make us do is be conscious about the environment and our relationship with it. Is landscape one of your sort of unifying themes, like animal life?
I've never, I should say, regarded landscapes as landscapes. When I was very young, sort of 3 or 4, I was my brother's sort of attendant. He was a lot older than I was. He was like a surrogate father. And he was obsessed is the word, with just shooting, wandering the hillsides and shooting. And I was his sort of little dog. And so, from the beginning, a landscape was to me just the living things in it. So a landscape without game is to me a dead landscape. A river without life is to me just a dead object. So it's not landscapes I'm looking at, but the life in landscapes. That's what interests me.
Could you illustrate that with a poem?
Well, Widdop's a landscape. Widdop is a reservoir in the moor above, between Hebden Bridge and Colne. A lonely spot. I used to go up there a lot when I was a child. My mother used to take me up there. Where there was nothing, somebody put a frightened lake. Where there was nothing, stony shoulders broadened to support it. The wind from between the stars swam down to sniff at the trembling. Trees holding hands, eyes closed, acted at world. Some heathgrass crept close in fear. Nothing else, except when a gull blows through, a rip in the fabric, out of nothingness into nothingness.
Now that you're interested, obviously, like most people, in ecological and conservational issues, does that change the way you look at the landscape, the way you look at animals, the way you write poems? Does it change your kind of objectivity?
It's changed my idea about the world, yes. I first became aware of it in the States in 1959. And we used to go fishing on Cape Cod. And then towards the end of 1959, there was an article in a magazine there called The Nation, which was a sort of radical little magazine. It used to publish things that couldn't get a hearing anywhere else. And it was an account of the dumping of atomic waste off Boston, 7 days a week, by a commercial dumper who had just simply contracted with his ordinary dumping license to carry this stuff in barrels that would last about 15 years in seawater out into 30 fathoms of water off Boston. And this had been going on since 1945, and it was then 1959, and the barrels were beginning to break up. And the mackerel around Cape Cod were radioactive. They tried to get Kennedy involved, and I think he did get involved eventually. But that was my revelation of what was happening. And simultaneously, of course, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, came out, which suddenly revealed the whole of America as a poisoned land. Anyway, by the time I came back to England, I was aware of all this. And since then, I just became very involved with it all. But it's a bad thing in that it spoils the world for you. I've become very involved with these rivers down here. And to begin with, when I wasn't too worried and when I wasn't too aware of it, and when these rivers were pretty full of fish, they were just paradisal. They were just most wonderful places. But now I look at these rivers and it's just like looking at a sort of dying relative. You can no longer see them as they were.
What do you do about that as a poet? Does it make a difference to the way you write?
Well, I've written things about this. You know, I've tried to write sort of semi-protest pieces of verse about this sort of thing. But I don't think it works. It may work as propaganda for a little bit, for some people, for some readers, but I don't think it can ever be the real thing. For some reason it can't. Whenever I write about anything from that particular world of rivers or whatever that seems to me to work for me, it's it completely ignores that poisoned aspect. It just carries on as if none of that existed.
Are you still, do you think, what Shelley called an unacknowledged legislator of the world? Or do you think that role's now left to popular forms of entertainment? I mean, is poetry any sort of force for changing minds and priorities?
Well, Auden said, poetry makes nothing happen. But I think one of the strongest ingredients in the collapse of the Soviet system was the poetry written in Eastern Europe and in Russia. It was the poetry that did it. The poetry that kept alive, focused, found the attitudes, the basic standing point, and that gave definition to the feeling that finally brought them down. So I think in that case, it did make things happen. And I think that was, poetry doing its real job.
Ted Hughes, thank you very much.